And so they shoot these bullets, but you never know you're being shot. They're micro bullets. So they're shooting you all day long while this is inside of you. And it's the influence, the collective harm that those bullets have over a period of time that really causes the damage. So what does that mean? A really good illustration, I can take you and your fit body, do a laparotomy on you. Big incision, right down, sternum to your pubic symphysis. Open you up, dump a bunch of this stuff in, close you up. You're still going to look great for a while. But as the micro bullets start firing over a period of time, your appearance and your performance is going to start to degrade. But it's so slow, you're not going to be able to detect it. And that is the state of health of the average human being.
Dr. Sean O'Mara, we know about belly fat. We know about visceral fat. We know in the general sense that it's bad. But there's other types of fat, subcategories of fat that might even be potentially more dangerous than just the blanket term. I mean, can we talk about those and how people can identify them, what they are, what they do, these sort of inflammatory fats in the body?
Sure. So I like to sum this up that there's good fat and bad fat inside the body. But most people, Thomas, just think about fat. They lump it together and they just think it's kind of they kind of have a notion that, I want less fat and want to have more muscle. But if you can get a human being to understand the exploitable value to understanding these fats that are inside their body, now you've given them a wealth of knowledge that I call like a fountain of health. It gives them fidelity to focus in on what really matters to improve a few things, their appearance and their performance. So I lump those two factors together as an explanation for health. Health really is how well you look, how good you look, and how well you perform. So these metrics, understanding good fat and bad fat, help people to optimize their health and their quality of life better than anything else.
So after today's video, I put a link down below for 25% off Seed's Daily Synbiotic. I'm a huge fan. It's the only probiotic that I personally use. And the interesting thing is they publish a lot of their own literature. So they publish their own clinical trials. And sometimes it doesn't work in their favor, but they publish it anyway because they are honest. And that's what I appreciate about them. But interestingly enough, it's the only probiotic that has this multi-stage delivery system where it has a capsule inside of a capsule. So when you think about probiotics, it's easy to think supplement company sham. But the reality is there is not a whole lot more in the world of supplements that is more vetted out than probiotic usage. The problem is most are destroyed in the gut. So that's what I like about Seed is they put their money where their mouth is with their technology, with their clinical trials, and also just with overall customer service and quality products. So that link is down below for 25% off Seed's Daily Synbiotics.
So one of the reasons why you started this out by saying, we kind of know about belly fat and visceral fat. There's this kind of a vague acquaintance that people know that, visceral fat is a bad thing, but they don't really have much detail. They really should have a much better working knowledge of it. It's not like you have to have an advanced degree or doctoral degree, but here's what I will tell you. You need to know more than your doctor because your physician will not know about this. So what I like to educate my client patients on is first what visceral fat is. It's one of the first of 4 bad inflammatory areas of fat inside your body. And then I educate them about the one area of fat. There's actually 2 very beneficial types of fat. One is good fat is brown adipose tissue, BAT or brown fat. People know about that. It's associated from cold plunging, gives you thermogenesis. I don't really show any scans on that because it requires a specialized protocol to see that. So that one you get from cold plunging. But the good fat, and we'll get into it, is called superficial sucky fat, and we'll get started on it. So those are the 2 good ones. But what I like to first start people understanding is an awareness about these 4 bad areas of fat, and I call them the 4 horsemen. They're bad guys. They are really destructive over a slow period of time, and so with your permission, we'll get started on it. So what I do is I work with a medical device, an MRI, and people should know what MRIs are, MRI imagery. And I typically get an image right through the abdomen of the individual in what's called the axial plane. So it's this square right here that you can see. And when you get an image through here, it's like the magician who saw somebody in half, the lady on the stage. Okay, so it creates an image like a slice, kind of like a pizza pie, through an individual. And this is their abdomen. Okay, so they're laying typically on a stretcher when they go through an MRI scanner, when you get an MRI, and you're looking up at the ceiling and you're laying on your back. So this is your belly, anterior surface of your abdomen, and this is your back. You're laying on your back. So on an MRI, quick teaching on it, anything that is white is going to be fat or fluids for the most part. So typically when you see white, it's going to be fat. So we're going to look at these 4 damaging areas of fat that are inflammatory, and we're going to and then look at the good fat. So when it comes to these 4, fat is white, and then what's dark are typically muscles, intercostals. These 2 muscles here are called the erector spinae muscles. This is your six-pack, your abdominis rectus. And then these are very interesting. These are the iliopsoas muscles, and they're called your core. And so we'll look at muscle, and the other thing that shows up as dark are organs. So colon, small intestine, stomach, liver, organs inside of you, and even bones. So this is the vertebral body, one part of your spinal column. And so dark is either muscle, organ, or bone. Fat is white. And I like to credit, whenever I do a show, this image here belongs to the physician that taught me about visceral fat. It's Dr. C.J. Zhang. So credit to him. And he wasn't the first one to find it, but you know what? He found it all by himself because he was a researcher at the University of Washington up in Seattle. And he was studying atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and chronic disease. And he noticed the people that had the most amount of chronic disease had this white stuff inside him when he was using an MRI. So he asked the question, he speaks with he was born in China, so he speaks English with a Chinese accent. He said, "What is all this white stuff?" He said, "What is all that white stuff?" And what he found out when he researched what that white stuff was is visceral fat. So what's interesting to me, and I tell the story, is the guy has an MD, PhD, very educated, and he had to ask what this white stuff was because it wasn't taught in medical school. It wasn't taught in his, wasn't taught in mine. And as far as I can tell, it's not taught in any medical school in the world. So American medical schools don't have it in their curriculum, visceral fat. And it would be speculation on my part exactly why it's not taught in medical school. But it should, because it's so inflammatory. And if you're wondering how inflammatory and problematic it is, here's what I would tell you and all your followers. Jump on Google, jump in ChatGPT, and whatever ails you, type it in, comma, and then put in visceral fat and see what science shows about your problem, okay? Nothing should concern you as much as your own problems. I mean, you don't really want to live your life because of other people's problems. It might be altruistic, but start with your own issues. Get yourself better. So I like to challenge people to understand in the context of their own lives, their own disease, understand that relationship, what visceral fat has, as far as their condition. And I've yet to find anybody that has a condition that doesn't have some sort of connection back to visceral fat. Now, proving causality, that visceral fat causes this is very problematic because we basically have to cause people to get this disease process inside their body. And I don't think you're going to get any institutional review board and IRB to approve a study model like that to show causation. But there's a lot of connection association in studies where people have certain chronic conditions have this visceral fat. And it's way stronger than cholesterol. So the first bad one is visceral fat. The second one that's always associated in proportionality to visceral fat is myosteatosis, these white streaks that start get deposited in the muscles. And we'll go into the next slide, show this a little bit better. But this is Dr. Zhang's scan when he scanned himself about 15 years ago. He's got a 31-inch waist. So I've got a 32-inch waist. So his is smaller than mine. And look how much white stuff he has, how much visceral fat. So a better scan to take a look at is this one here with higher resolution. This is a current client patient of mine. Huge amount of white stuff in the middle, visceral fat. And here's the proportionality. What we see, and I've worked with thousands of people now, the visceral fat that you see inside will be in proportion to the amount of fat inside the muscle. Now, I will say the one exception I do sometimes see are people that use gear. So if you're using a performance hat, and I can never tell so far, I haven't been able to tell because there's too much overlap. Is it the testosterone? Is it the hormone replacement? Is it some gear? I can't figure out because the studies haven't been done. Yeah. But when somebody comes to me and they're worried or they're trying as an objective to put on more muscle mass, very frequently I'll see less of this and a higher amount of this, a ratio. So you tend to see leaner muscles. And my inclination is to believe it has more to do with testosterone. Yeah. So they seem to accumulate more visceral fat. They seem to have less of a myosteatosis, or human marbling is another way to describe myosteatosis, or fatty muscle replacement.
Human Wagyu.
Yeah, human Wagyu, man. Yeah, you got it. So, and then the third one is subcutaneous fat, okay? So these are your love handles. Everybody can reach back and feel around the top of their iliac crest, which is this right in this area here. You can see love handles starting to form, and then this black line that goes through there is a line of demarcation. It's a membrane that separates your subcutaneous fat into two compartments. Now, what's interesting to me as a researcher and a practicing physician is that this membrane, if it's going to separate subcutaneous fat into two compartments, it must have some sort of biological reason. And it does so. And as it turns out, these two fat depots are like bricks and clouds different. They are completely different. So visceral fat, muscle fat, and deep subcutaneous fat are inflammatory because of what they secrete, inflammatory molecules. Tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, resistin, which is an interesting molecule that not a lot of people know about, and then many other chemokines, cytokines, adipokines that get released from these inflammatory molecules, many of which we still aren't even aware of because we're constantly learning about different things that are going on inside the body. So these induce inflammation and disease through the body, these three depots, because of those molecules that are getting spewed out every single second.
So even the traditional subcutaneous belly fat is still, I mean, it's not equally as bad as this internal visceral fat, but it's still bad too, right? I mean, because people, is there a difference? I don't mean to interrupt, but I just don't want to miss this point. Like abdominal subcutaneous fat, does it have a different property than, say, like tricep subcutaneous fat? Like if it's just in the abdominal region in general, is it a different phenotype? Is it a different classification altogether?
I freaking love that question. It's brilliant. It's a great question. It hasn't been studied, and I haven't looked enough, particularly at the other areas of fat, like on the extremities. I'm starting to look at that, and I'm asking the same question. And science really needs to look at that. Now, what we have looked at is right in this particular area, the deep subcutaneous fat and superficial subcutaneous fat. My guess is that these two different depots exist in other parts of the body. So we see this in the thoracic abdominal region, so the abdomen and the back and the torso. But I think the same principles, and we'll show some scans in an axial plane through the legs. And we can ask the same question. You can see this membrane separation in the legs. And so when we get to those, I'll address that. There are some studies that have looked at the amount of subcutaneous fat in males on their legs increase two things: the amount of carcinoma within the prostate and the mortality associated, meaning how likely it is you're going to die when you have that. Now, women, as you know, have more fertile, kind of a more fertile figure, which means their adiposity, which is the big medical term we say for fat, it gets deposited more in their thighs and their lower extremities on their butt. But in men, it's just the opposite. So if you start accumulating a lot of that subcutaneous fat in males, and I will say we need to look at specifically how much of that is in the deeper space, deep subcutaneous fat like this, is going to be more problematic. And so with my clients, I get them to increase the superficial subcutaneous fat, which is good. So if you're listening today, one of the things you need to reach for is a pen and paper and write down superficial subcutaneous fat, because that's good fat. That's one of the good fats that I'm always harping about. Now, why is it good? Well, first, it doesn't cause the harm that these other three do, because it's not secreting like the other three do all the inflammatory molecules. Now, it does secrete a very important molecule that you want more of. And if Thomas DeLauer can fall in love with this, you're going to live better and longer. And that molecule is called adiponectin. adiponectin. And the system that profits from disease doesn't want Thomas or his followers to know about adiponectin. So adiponectin is just the opposite of inflammatory molecule. It actually goes and is protective against disease. So what we do see with adiponectin is reduced mortality and reduced incidence of disease, like heart attacks, strokes, fatty liver disease, neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and MS, and cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, and lower incidence of diabetes and even obesity. So interesting, this one area of fat actually is protective against obesity. So you really want this beneficial superficial subcutaneous fat because it secretes that really interesting molecule. And you want to have less of this, less of the muscle fat, less of visceral fat. And when we see this, typically, we see less of these three. And when we see a lot of these three, we see a lot less of that. So the proportionality here is pretty evident in this individual here. These three horsemen, these bad guys, they're all the same size as a horse. Their stature is the same. And the other thing I like to educate the audience about is these three horsemen can't do a thing to you. What hurts your body is their guns. And so they shoot these bullets, but you never know you're being shot. They're micro bullets. So they're shooting you all day long while this is inside of you. And it's the influence, the collective harm that those bullets have over a period of time that really causes the damage. So what does that mean? A really good illustration, I can take you and your fit body, do a laparotomy on you. Big incision, right down, sternum to your pubic symphysis. Open you up, dump a bunch of this stuff in, close you up, you're still going to look great for a while. But as the micro bullets start firing over a period of time, your appearance and your performance is going to start to degrade. But it's so slow, you're not going to be able to detect it. And that is the state of health of the average human being. They're not aware that they're falling apart because of the influence of this. They think they're falling apart because of aging. The reality is it's not aging. It's a term I call diseasing. They're simply acquiring disease as this undetected fat within their abdomen, within their muscles, within that deep subcutaneous fat starts accumulating and starts destroying their tissue. So the fourth area of fat that I think is
Can I ask a question on that last one? So it's my understanding. So there's a lot more. So there's some like pragmatic stuff, right? I believe there's like 4 or 5 times the amount of like even cortisol receptors within visceral fat, right? So it's hyper responsive to stress. Have you found in your practice and just in the research that on one hand, stress is a huge contributor to visceral fat formation in conjunction.
Enormous.
But also on the contrary, it would make sense, and I've kind of alluded to this in other videos, that because there are more glucocorticoid receptors and cortisol receptors, that perhaps deliberate good stress via exercise, intense exercise particularly, would have more of an impact on visceral fat because you're still acting on that same axis, but in, AMPK phosphorylated state, in a state where you're in a deficit, where you're inducing stress, versus the opposite, inducing stress in the presence of insulin, where you would be compounding and adding fat. So am I right to assume that?
That might be the most intelligent and my most favorite question I've ever been asked.
Well,
100%. Yeah. That's exactly the case. And so the best example of that, and I do have an example of it radiographically, is in this scan right here. Let me just pull it up to be able to make that case convincingly for the audience. So what we did in this particular case is we noticed an individual who had accumulated a large amount of visceral fat. They came to us. They were 58 years old. They were CEO of a company. And so they had a lot of stress because they ran this company. And we gave them our protocol for the National Science Foundation. So, my experience learning about visceral fat came from Dr. Zeng, and then he and I received a grant from the National Science Foundation to study it. But we didn't just study the impact and its association with disease. We wanted to make a difference. So we studied what caused visceral fat to leave, what caused it to happen, what brought it on, and what caused it to leave. So to your question, definitely stress causes visceral adiposity, the formation of visceral fat within the abdominal cavity. Now, here's the interesting thing that was captured in this particular individual. This guy was given our strategies that we identified for the National Science Foundation to eliminate this visceral fat. Now, in this case, this is a follow-up scan, and I'll just tell you, and everybody's following along, that his original scan, which was about 2 months or a month and a half before this one, looked exactly the same. So when we do a follow-up, when you do strategies, you want to see it get better. And this guy was the first case he didn't get better. He stayed the same. So we needed to know why he was like that. So we went through, and this is a good time to talk about it. The things that we saw cause visceral fat to stay on and make the strategies not work were first, cheating, eating processed foods. Big contributor to visceral fat is eating processed foods, especially processed carbohydrates. When you eat that kind of food, it causes visceral adiposity. Second one, poor sleep. We can give you all the healthiest strategies in the world, but if you're not sleeping good, you're not going to live as well. You're going to have more disease because you're going to have more visceral fat. The third is stress. So if you're in a really stressful situation, this guy, we talked about stress. He's, I'm hitting all my numbers in my company. We're growing. We're blowing it up. Everything's good at home. No issues, no problems at home. Fourth thing we talked about was alcohol. If you're drinking alcohol, it's going to make it more refractory, which means harder to get rid of that visceral fat. And the fifth thing, and your audience may not like this, but I'm just going to tell you, distance running, durational exercise. When you do too much exercise, it makes it very hard to get rid of this visceral fat. So what we found works better is stress hormesis in a very short, maximal, intensive manner, but a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. So to your question, that's what gets rid of visceral fat. When you sprint, when you worked out like We were working out this morning. I almost puked 3 times in a short period of time working out. By the way, to the audience, if you get invited to Thomas, you do not want to work out before, because I said to him, I'm not sure I can do this show after how bad I felt, but I feel awesome now, so I'm in good shape. But when we got this guy to give up distance running, he was doing 10 miles a day, 5 times a week, so 50 miles. And we got him to stop it at the threat of being kicked out of the study and no more free MRIs and no more exams by physicians. He switched to sprinting, and from February 6th to April 3rd, not even 2 months, just shy of 2 months, look at the dramatic reduction in his visceral fat. But let's look at his deep subcutaneous fat too. I picked this up on Drew Pruitt's show. Now, I've been looking at these scans for years, but do you see his deep subcutaneous fat, that compartment right there? Look how much he reduced that deep subcutaneous fat because he reduced his visceral fat. So sprinting, maximum intensity exercise in a very, very brief, short period of time vanquishes visceral fat. So it's a brilliant question. You got out a huge point for your audience just asking that question.
Well, I appreciate that. But it's also, I mean, isn't there, in that same vein, and I'm not just tooting my own horn with, like fasting and things like that, but I mean, the evidence that I have seen when you're in a fasted state and you are having a heightened level of adrenaline, epinephrine, because those catecholamines are elevated in that fasted state. Plus, it seems as though from what I may be misinterpreting this literature, so I'm clarifying with you, so feel free to call me out on it. Mm-hmm. But it seems as though it's almost more efficient when epinephrine and when these catecholamines are higher. It's more efficient because visceral fat can sort of drain right into the portal vein. So it's like if you're in a stressed state, i.e. fasting, and then doing maybe some short, intense exercise in a fasted state, it's almost a more efficient system for your body to pull from in those quote unquote stressed states.
Yeah. Dude, you're awesome. Exactly the case. So, what's interesting, and I'll show you, I call it my human dashboard. So when you pay attention to your body, your ability to detect change is key. So let's look, this is skin turgor. All right, this is a video. And when you get skin turgor, how fast your skin snaps back is a measurement of how healthy you are. Now I'm going to play this. Now watch how fast my skin, you can't even detect it. Now the truth is, if we had audio here, what you would hear is my skin snaps back so fast it makes a snapping sound. Now, you just saw me do it here, and it didn't do it as fast. So what happened? Why does it make a snapping noise where it's faster to even than like an 8-year-old kid? The reason is I did 4 things together. So biohackers oftentimes will stack supplements, because they found that when they combine certain supplements or you combine certain biohacks together, you get even better results. So it's synergy. 1 + 1 + 1 should equal 3, but 1 + 1 + 1 sometimes will make 6. And here's an example of it. So if you do 4 things to increase your skin turgor test right there, the 4 things, what I noticed by paying attention was I was in a fasted state. I was, I think, at about 72 or 96 hours, 0 calorie. I'd worked out in the sunshine, and I'd particularly done large muscles. So I was squatting outdoors in the sun in a maximum intensive exercise. And the third thing, fourth thing that I combined with that is I went into a sauna. So those 4 things, sauna, sunshine, fasted state, and maximum exercise were combined in about a 1-hour period of time. And it produced that kind of response. Now, what is the biological explanation of that? Nitric oxide, the subject of a 1999 Nobel Prize in medicine. Nitric oxide improves your blood flow. So what I'll show, and hopefully this shows up because I took it just this morning from a Thomas DeLauer workout in his gym. So this is my elbow right here in your gym. Now look at that massive pulse right there. Okay, so in a short period of time, I have this visible pulse. Now you typically in medicine will feel for a pulse. And if somebody is found unresponsive, they train you in CPR to feel for a pulse. But you actually should be able to see these pulses. So when nitric oxide acts on your vasculature, the magnitude of blood flow in there is so enhanced, it becomes visible and apparent. So the combination of sunshine, maximum intensity exercise, going into a sauna in a fasted state increases exponentially your production of nitric oxide. And so you're improving your blood flow. Now, if you improve blood flow, Thomas, throughout your body, you're going to perfuse tissues better on a cellular level and on an organ level, collectively, the body as well. And so, I like to say when it comes to real estate, the expression is location, location, location. When it comes to health, it's blood flow, blood flow, blood flow. And blood flow is enhanced by nitric oxide. Nitric oxide production by the endothelial cells in the body are improved and enhanced when you get rid of these inflammatory fat depots. Visceral fat, myosteatosis, deep subcutaneous fat. So if a take-home point, I love to get audiences with your audience is pay attention to your body, watch for skin turgor, how fast it snaps back, and pay attention to what improves that. Nature favors the organism that analyzes the best. If you go through motions and you're not analyzing the benefit that you get, you don't have the ability to encourage and improve. And if you're not paying attention to how you're worsening, you're not going to pick up on that. And that is the plight of the average human being. They don't know they're improving. They don't know they're falling apart because they're not. Now, on a species level, I think we did it for hundreds of thousands of years. We would pay attention to it. Today,
we're distracted.
It's cholesterol.
Yeah.
Everybody talks, they rely, and I'll just be honest, a poor appearing physician that's guiding them, unless you're going to somebody who's young. But the average physician, their appearance and their quality of life, why are you getting advice from them about how you should be living? Mm-hmm. I tell people you'd live a way better quality of life paying attention to a good health coach than you would going to a physician who doesn't know anything about how you should be living your life. Now, I'm an MD. I took care of the presidents of the United States, vice presidents when I was active duty. I'm a board, certified, trained emergency medicine physician. You have an emergency, you don't want to go to a health coach. You want to go to an emergency medicine physician. If you got a broken bone, you're in a car wreck, you're having a heart attack. Because I'm not going to reach for some NAC if I'm having a heart attack. But as far as lifestyle goes, you really want to be making informed decisions and paying attention how your body is either improving or falling apart.
You mentioned something that was really cool that I'm learning all these different things that are connecting so many dots for me. And that was, tissue perfusion, being able to get more, blood flow to a given area, capillary density, these things. And then interestingly, because I had Brian McKenzie on a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how nasal breathing massively improves nitric oxide in the body. Well, you know what else nasal breathing is parasympathetic, lower stress.
100%.
Right? So connecting these dots, I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, so if we are increasing nitric oxide in the body, we are more than likely in a parasympathetic state or achieving a parasympathetic state in one way or another, which therefore inclines that we are not stressed, which comes back to your previous question, talking about stress and the accumulation of visceral fat and how it's one of the main reasons. So it's like you're looking at these, it's like you want to be able to induce as much of a parasympathetic state throughout your daily life with deliberate sympathetic states, rather than living in a sympathetic stress state all the time and just compounding it with random exercise that's not really doing you any service, right? It's just, and what I've found, and yes, I enjoy distance running. I don't run 50 miles a week. I run maybe 6 to 8 miles 2 to 3 times a week, but I also do. Anyway, I don't need to justify that. Point is that you find that people, as they get older, vigorous intensity just becomes hard. There's a mental barrier to it. When you're young, you want to do these quick spurts. You want to, like, look at a kid. Like, my son's 7. It's like, he will go on runs with me, not for 6-7 miles, but he will go on longer runs, but he prefers it. Like, take me to a field and just let me sprint, right? It's that vigorous youth, right? And as we get older, like, vigorous, there's multiple roadblocks to vigorous as you get older. Like, it does. So you find that older individuals, they start gravitating to longer, slower distance, because I'm going to call it out as the elephant in the room, and it might piss some people off, but it is easier. It is a lower barrier to entry mentally to wrap your head around. It is, and I'm not saying it's bad. Zone 2 is great. Don't get me wrong for what it is. But it is a lot easier to say, I'm going to go hop on a bike and I'm going to ride for 40 minutes at a relatively low intensity where I can let my mind wander and do whatever it needs to do. It's much easier to do that than it is to say, this is going to hurt for 30 seconds. And I'm not going to be able to think about anything else but this for 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, you're admirably scientific and you're asking the right questions. And I would respond to the metric of quality of life. If you look at people's capacity for exercising really intensively in a maximal state, that quality of life is more connected, that ability is more connected to a quality of life than their ability to do something for a long period of time. So I think one of the best experience anecdotally that your followers could think about is somebody who can do marathons, slow distance running for a long period of time. They end up with atrophied bodies, very thin, emaciated bodies, versus an older person that can do maximum intensity exercise, like maybe a tremendous amount of pull-ups to failure, or push-ups to failure, or sprinting. Mm-hmm. And I think those become more important. So if your goal is to run a long distance over a long period of time, that's distance running is going to be important to you, or exercising, sometimes cycling, or rowing or something, a very, very long period of time. There's people go out and row forever in the oceans and whatnot between islands and, continents, I suppose. But it really, when it comes to quality of life, you want to do it. So here's an example, a short little video, 30 seconds. I'll show, for the sake of the followers. This is how I exercise, and you got me to use your machine. And if you can't do this, I oftentimes get to this through sprinting. But if you can't get to do it naturally, you can use a machine. So here I am using this ROM machine, and I got on it completely rested. And in 1 minute, 60 seconds of exercise, I don't do the whole thing. I have BFR, blood flow restriction bands on. Now watch the degree of respiratory distress. Look how fast I'm breathing. I have recruitment of my accessories muscles, my intercostal muscles. I'm in respiratory distress.
It's kind of disturbing. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. So look at me breathing. Okay. So, but I'm 60 years old there. I'm 61 today. But
today's your birthday?
What's that?
Today's your birthday?
No, I'm 61.
Right,
yeah, I'm just
today.
60.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm 61 now. Here I was 60. But the notion is your ability to use your respiratory drive. I call it your gas tank. Okay, so when you're fighting for your life, you need muscle mass and performance. But what's going to fuel you are your lungs and your capacity to engage them. Now, if you have just done jogging, you've only worked on slow twitch muscles, you have not engaged to the state of maximum capacity of your inhalation expiration, you're not going to be able to bring to that fight as much energy and performance. And so as quality of life goes, the older, the more you have that capability, the better you're going to be quality of life when you're 89 years old. And almost nobody thinks this way. Nobody is aware that that's what, but you know what kept us in the gene pool? 2 things. The longest and your quality of life came down to 2 things for Homo sapiens.
Your ability to survive and fight.
Yeah, and survival turned on how well you could fight and how fast you could run. Yeah. Those 2 things. How fast you could run, how good you could fight. Now, I don't advocate for my client patients to go down to a bar and get in a bar fight or a fight purposely. But what we could do is you came pretty close to it today. working out. So did I. When you work out in a very intensive manner, you can start to emulate what goes on in the wild between animals. They're fighting each other, prey, predator. Sometimes it's challenge for dominance, but it's an intense, maximally intensive event in a short period of time. And if I just challenge everybody listening to us today, give it a try. Yeah. See what happens in your life when you start incorporating this, and try it as elimination. Yep. Go completely away from, cycling, rowing, running for a period of time. Just start doing sprinting, maximum intensity exercise, short period of time. Track the metrics, pay attention to your skin turgor, watch for the advent and onset of visible pulses, watch for how much better you become. And I think your followers will agree that this is a really cool and valuable introduction into their health.
Yeah, and time effective too. That's what's nice about it. Yeah. I guess the caveat is that people only have so much time, right? I don't think that, in my opinion, that maybe doing some distance work or whatever is deleterious. In my opinion, and I'm curious your take, it's probably just the absence of the intense stuff, because people only have time to, I would imagine that Dr. Zhang, that was his name, right?
Yeah, Dr. Zhang.
He was probably running, but people typically choose one or the other. Just now are we starting to see, in time of the recording, where hybrid athletes are really becoming a thing. It's becoming popular. You've got guys that are but they've got the time. I'm going to say that, the time to be a hybrid athlete, meaning you're putting in the miles, and you're also putting in the extreme vigorous and strength work. But in the past, a runner was a runner, and you asked them to do any strength work or any kind of intense, heavily glycolytic, power moves or any kind of intense, vigorous stuff, they wouldn't be able to do it. We're starting to see some people that are able to do that, but I'm totally with you. But I do feel that it's probably not. It's more so the absence of this. This is what we're missing, right? And I've always thought that the exercise, the intensity needs to be the catalyst, and your zone 2 work, that should be coming from life. Your life should be active, 100%. Right? So it's people, we live in this world where it's artificial exercise and then sedentary. Mm-hmm. Artificial, global gym, go, then sedentary. It's you look at the cultures that really live the longest, but also, I'm just going to come right out and say it, they look the best, they perform pretty good just in life. They, you look at a lot of these European countries, and it's what is it? It's they're very deliberate, 3-4 days a week with short bouts of exercise, but then they're flipping active all day. They're walking, they're moving. So it's it's exercise. What we see as exercise when we go do cardio or whatever, in my opinion, that's life. Your life should incorporate that, and you need deliberate, vigorous activity to be the catalyst for these chemical changes and these other changes to happen throughout the rest of the day.
100%. So my response to that is, I even though I'm this huge advocate for sprinting, maximum intensity exercise, and I get people to stop running and distance running, distance cycling, I will say that, I'm sure our ancestors had to do some jogging, running. It wasn't a maximum intensity exercise, because sometimes you had to chase things for a longer period of time, or sometimes you were being chased for a longer period of time. And, zone 2 workout may have happened when we changed encampments. So First Nations people, Native Americans carrying teepees around, they were doing zone 2 workouts for, moving from one location to another, following a, buffalo tribe. The question I have as a researcher whose passion is the biological optimization of human beings, exploring, being consumed with, how do we get Homo sapiens to be the very best form of biological existence possible, is I think we have to look at our ancestors ancestrally, what they did, how they lived, because that's how we are evolved and adopted. So the proportionality to distance exercise, durational exercise, to maximum intense exercise needs to be looked at. It's my guess, purely speculative, that we did almost very little. We do encampments, movements, Every once in a while, you'd have a longer run. Maybe it was a forest fire and you had to run away from a forest fire. But most of the time, it was hunting and fighting. So it's maximum.
Zone 1 and maximum.
And I think that's that we went to. And I think there's, if you can be more intentional today as a modern day Homo sapien to live more in that parasympathetic state and less frequent sympathetic state. You talked about nasal breathing. I mean, just look at this. Two faces, okay? This one right here. Now look at this one. Yeah. Which one are you attracted to? Now, the average person, neither, right? The average person wouldn't even pay attention to it. If they saw somebody hanging their mouth open and live like that, they wouldn't pick up consciously that person is in a unhealthy, less healthy state. But if you're a mouth breather, either mouth breathing at nighttime or mouth breathing all the time, you're missing out of the ability to produce that nitric oxide and the corollary benefits that you get from a parasympathetic state, being more intentionally parasympathetic, relaxed.
And finding a mate.
Yeah. Well, even on an unconscious level, women who encounter an individual, and typically, let's be honest, somebody who's got their mouth hanging out are usually patently kind of unattractive and diseased. They're oftentimes heavy. Yeah. You see this kind of heavy-set person. Hi, my name is Chubby. I'm chubby. My mama's chubby. My daddy's chubby. And I'm chubby. Yeah. Their mouth is kind of hanging open versus somebody that's more relaxed, living in a parasympathetic state. They have a nice state of health. They don't have this inflammatory fat depots in their body. They're going to be naturally nose breathing. But what's interesting to me is how we seem to be losing the attention that we formerly had, our ancestors had, for tracking the deterioration of our health and the improvement of our health. And I think had you and I had gone back 100,000 years, I'm pretty sure if we showed up 100,000 years ago, they'd look at both of us and they'd say, both you guys are really messed up. You're just not as healthy as the 100 people were 100,000 years ago. But they would also pick up on the slightest change, like probably even 1 to 2 days. You'd have an elder that'd say, Thomas, I just saw that you're falling apart here. You need to do that. Or Thomas, you're getting better. And they encourage you because I saw this. And they would pick up on these little nuances that largely get ignored today.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah. And I'm deeply attracted to those things because as we saw visceral fat leave, and I didn't know it was going to happen. It wasn't like, I had this expectation. I just noticed all these changes started to happen in myself and my client patients as they got rid of this visceral fat, the onset of visible pulses. And then one interesting aspect to it, this adult conversation is erectile functionality. So as people improve their blood flow, it's no surprise that in males, you would have improved erectile functionality. But what's really interesting is that improves to a point that an erection is not only really hard and firm, but it also starts to bounce. So in males, they see this little, my client patients get this little bounce, the pulse. And then pretty soon it gets this massive bounce with every heartbeat. And that is a visual optic that you're really improved your blood flow. And young males, like 15 to 20 or so, will have that. And then it gradually goes away. And if you're listening today and you're 50 or 60, you had it. You just forgot it. And it just gradually disappears. And you want to have that kind of a maximum blood flow. So paying attention to functionality, appearance is really important to your health. Nobody talks about it. And social media, hosts like yourself play a huge role in introducing these important areas of science that would otherwise, Thomas, never be communicated to the average person because it's not taught in medical school. The metrics that we are taught in medical school are, what is aligned to CPT coding and revenue and chasing disease and treating disease. But I heard this one interesting saying, well, if medicines really work, why do you have to keep taking them? And so really, it's the notion that we just permit disease to continue. But when you get rid of these damaging inflammatory fat, in every form of chronic disease we studied in 6,000 Americans, we saw every form of chronic disease either substantially improve or go completely away when you eliminated visceral fat, muscle fat, deep subcutaneous fat, and hard fat. So I think it's really these are really important metrics. So I'll show this one because the fourth area of fat we haven't shown is this fat around the heart. So here's this. This is a very interesting study. This guy came to me in July of this year. Now, this is his right lung, his left lung. He's got a lot of fat in his muscles. This is actually visceral fat starting to pop up in his lung space. And between his right lung and left lung is his heart. Now, notice this big chunk of white around his heart. That is heart fat. That is a combination of epicardial and pericardial fat and a little bit of mediastinal fat. It's highly inflammatory, and it starts to encase a heart, and it really becomes mechanically restrictive. I mean, the heart can't beat if it's got this gigantic basket of fat around it, not to mention, from a chemical standpoint, all those inflammatory molecules. But look how much he eliminated that in just about 3.5 months. Now, what's interesting is who this guy is. Now, I'm not going to share his name, but he gave me permission to talk about it. This guy is an attorney to one of the presidents. I won't say which one, but this guy is a highly accomplished trial attorney, national level, fantastic trial attorney. So when he came to me, he's a dot connector. He learned these strategies, what to measure, and he, boom, banged it out of the ballpark. So it's the notion, what's important here is your personality. How motivated are you to actually improve and pay attention to it? And if you give the average person who's motivated the metrics they need to perform, they'll improve that. And at the same time he did that, look at his abdomen. So I talked about the correlation between visceral fat and heart fat. So this was him, July, when he came. This line here is kind of a poor man's MRI. So for the sake of your audience, if you measure your distance in the sagittal plane, the sagittal abdominal diameter, the more that is, the more likely you have visceral fat. Yeah. It's not always the case, but visceral fat typically displaces the abdominal plane in the abdomen within the sagittal plane. So look how the red line is bigger than the blue line. The blue line is bigger than the yellow line. Over 3 months, he goes from having a dad bod laying down to having more of a flat abdomen, and he's actually reversing his diverticular disease, like a pristine his colon has gotten. He had diverticular disease, and he's just substantially improving in a 3 period of time. So personality plays a huge role in somebody's ability to improve their appearance and their quality of life.
Well, not to mention, I mean, it's interesting when you look at the personality of a driven person, someone that is a very motivated person. At the wide angle level, yes, we notice that with their business, with things like that. But then at a very micro level, when you're looking at it with a macro lens and you realize, okay, these people are also highly motivated in that 30-second interval of work in their exercise, right?
Yeah.
It's the same mindset. I've found that with very high performing people, with special forces operators, with executives, people that are just, they're wired that way. Mm-hmm. If you give them the playbook, a lot of them are willing to do the work. They just need the playbook, right? It's a time issue for them. They know that they don't have the time to go out and find the answers. But once the answers are kind of given to them, and it's a lot of them, some of them aren't that way, but you find these same kind of people, they're driven individuals, they give it all and then throw up and then give it all more. Yeah. Kind of like you did today, and it's like, they put in that work and they're willing to be able to have that drive. So the personality type makes a difference in all these different levels, willing to apply but I think the takeaway for the audience here is you have to be able to endure for 15, 30, 60 seconds. You've got to do that. And that will also reflect in how you live your life and how you choose foods and how you can abstain from food and go for periods of time without food and all these things, but just that deliberate attitude. And I think that's the operative word, deliberate, right? Really deliberate and have that drive.
Yeah, it's super interesting because you worked with the special operator community in the National Science Foundation study of 6,000 Americans we looked at. We looked at over 100 standard soldier service members that were Army, and they were just average across the board. And they got very poor results when we gave them things to do. They didn't really get results. And the same thing we saw in law enforcement and firefighters. So average people who are not rewarded based on performance are less motivated. They tend to gravitate towards jobs where you just get through. But those top performers, like the ones that you work with in special operator community, they're motivated to be the best of the best. And those high-end national ranked trial attorneys, high-end experts, people that run hedge funds and want to be the best, they get way better results when you work with them and when I work with them. Now, here's the interesting thing. We'll ask you, what do you think nature says? Why do those people get better results?
I could think of a few reasons. I mean, they're going to get the cheese. I mean, they're going to, right? So I mean, their compensation
is based on performance.
Yeah, they're going to get the cheese.
There's a biological explanation that comes down to the microbiome. This is very interesting. They looked at humans that exercise in one particular study in the microbiome, ones that exercise and ones that don't. And do you know they found a certain species of microbes that were present in the people that exercised? Now, that's an association, doesn't prove causality. But the question has to be asked, are we exercising or not exercising based on the microbes that we have? Motivation, at least in terms of the microbiome, in my opinion, is really coming from the particular species of microbes that we have within us. So here's the interesting thing. If you spend time with people that are better in terms of quality of life, you can benefit from that interaction through, basically acquiring their microbes. So when we worked out, you were kind of like apologizing because we were taking photographs and we had our arms around each other and we're sweaty. That didn't bother me a bit. You know what? I was like, I'll take this guy's sweat because he's got some good microbes. So you were a high performer. I didn't mind getting your sweat. Now, if you were some low performer, very unhealthy, I'd be like, oh my God, do you have a shower around here?
Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, where can everyone find you, man?
Yeah. So the best place to find me on my social media is just DRSEANOMARA. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, X. I'm on TikTok. I'm on LinkedIn, all under that same handle. I have a website, DRSEANOMARA.com. I have another website, growingbetternotolder.com. So I'm pretty heavily, I don't have the following you have, but I'm all over social media in a variety of different ways. And if anybody's listening and interested in becoming the best biological version of themselves, myself and my other fellow physicians work with me in my practice. Be happy to work with anybody's interested in that.
Right on, my man. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.